And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing next system starting to drop in, or is dropping into the northwest Bering Sea here, with some moisture starting to spread in towards St. Lawrence Island. And then up to the northeast there, we've got a trough bringing continuous light snow from the northern Seward Peninsula back up along the western and central Arctic coast, with some minor accumulations there. Otherwise, just some scattered light snow showers over the interior. Another system here southwest of the Aleutians, but the moisture between the two fronts kind of linking up, bringing some light rain from Adak on out to the west. And then a weakening front here along the southeast coast, North Gulf Coast, spreading some shower activity westward, possibly into northern Cook Inlet, maybe the Manuska Valley over later this evening and tonight, with rain continuing or showers over the southeast coast. And then tomorrow, kind of another band forms here and will bring an increase in the winds to the central and south coast of the Panhandle. A little bit there with, again, more rain in that area, but drier for the North Gulf Coast here with maybe some clearing. Areas of light snow in the central interior with some minor accumulations there, and continuous light snow also continues to fall for the western and central Arctic coast. And this weak front pushing a chance or increasing chances of light rain or snow into the southwest coast, particularly Nunivak Island there, with some light rain trailing back toward the Pribilof Islands. This system sliding off to the southeast. The low center will stay south of the Aleutians, but the front will be far enough north to push some light rain up into the central Aleutians, and a break for the eastern Aleutians. Not too bad. Kodiak Island, partly to mostly sunny, light northwest breezes, and light winds with maybe some clearing over the southwest interior. And then for the day on Wednesday, area light snow here for the portions of the Koyukuk Valley there down toward the Yukon River up to the Brooks Range, again with minimal accumulations there, and starting to dry out now over the Arctic coast. Maybe a few flurries or skiffs of light snow there on the east side, and that's about it. Very quiet weather pattern here over much of interior Alaska, with the exception of this system out to the west. Really light winds over the entire region here. This week low, just keeping it showery over the southeast coast. And for the coastal water forecast, southeast winds 25 knots tomorrow. For the south coast of the Panhandle, the seas just under 10 feet. East winds at 20 knots with 9-foot seas for the central coast, and northeast at 10 to 15 with 7 to 8-foot seas on the north coast. Clarence Strait, south winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. Stevens Passage east at 10 and north at 15 for Lynn Canal. And for the day on Wednesday, all of the inside waters here, pretty uniform wind direction and speed. Calling it southeast, 15 knots, seas 3 feet. South coast, south winds at 15 knots, 7-foot seas. And the north coast, east or east southeasterlies at 20 with 7-foot seas. Prince William Sound, light variable winds. Tomorrow, light northerlies at 10 knots for northern Cook Inlet, about 15 knots south of the Forelands. And then a little farther south, you get into some gale force westerlies blowing out of Kamishak Bay, and then they take a turn to the southeast there across the Barren Islands, with seas running at about 12 feet. Western North Gulf Coast, light variable winds, and then northeast at 10 to 15 for the eastern North Gulf Coast. And for Wednesday, Prince William Sound, northeast wind at about 15 knots, seas 3 feet. East-southeast at 15 for the eastern North Gulf Coast, north of 15 knots there, south of Resurrection Bay. And small craft advisories for the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay for west-northwest winds at 25 knots. Cook Inlet, north to northwest winds at 10 knots with 2 to 3-foot seas. Kodiak Island for Tuesday, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots, seas up to 7 feet. Alaska Peninsula northwest at 15 to 25 knots, with seas running 3 to 7 feet. And for the Bristol Bay area, northwest 20 knots. West winds 15 knots for Bristol Bay on Wednesday. In the Alaska Peninsula, variable winds 10 to 15 knots with seas down to 1 to 4 feet. And then Kodiak Island, westerly breeze at 15 to maybe 20 knots. Eastern Aleutians, variable to west winds at 10 to 15 knots. And for the central Aleutians, variable to southeast winds at 20 knots. And for the western Aleutians there, small craft advisories for east to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots. And then for the day on Wednesday, We've got west to southwest winds at 25 to 30 knots for the western Aleutians, Adak and Atka. South to southeast at 20 knots. And the eastern Aleutians, variable to southeast winds, 10 to 20 knots. And then for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, light northwest wind at about 15 knots for the Yukon Delta coast and St. Lawrence Island. South winds at 15 knots, southwest at 20 knots for the Pribilof Islands, as well as St. Matthew Island. Seas up here about 8 feet. And then for Wednesday, Norton Sound, east winds 15 knots, St. Lawrence Island, southeast at 15. Southwest coast, west wind 15 knots, southwest at 20 for St. Matthew Island, and southwest at 15 for the Pribilofs. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, over toward Barter Island at Demarcation Point, west winds at about 20 knots. Otherwise, for the central and eastern coasts, they're looking at west-southwest, 10 to 15 knots. Small craft advisories, though, for the western Arctic coast. Winds northwest at 25 knots, seas at about 4 feet. And for the Chukchi Sea, northwest winds 15 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas. Outlook for Wednesday, the Chukchi Sea, north winds 10 to 15 knots, seas 2 feet. Western Arctic coast, northwest at 10 with 2 foot seas. And the central and east side, winds will be west at 15 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas.